We continue to think about what's relevant there to the Strava experience. And those 5 words kind of define the way that we'd like to think we show up every day. When a member found us, would they stay with us?
Mark, pleasure seeing you again.
Oh, you as well. Thanks for having me.
I was just checking my Strava and I have 944 activities there, which is pretty high, isn't it?
Yeah, that's good. You're legit. You're I don't know. Hopefully there's some virtual reward in there for you on that. We got to get you to 1,000.
Almost 1,000, yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Awesome having you to this podcast. Let's start by speaking a bit about Strava, about the early days, about the story. How did you start?
Sure.
And we go from there.
Okay. Well, Strava has 2 starting dates and stories, so to speak. There's an important one that goes back to last century. This is where I'm going to turn myself into a dinosaur here. You're going to find out how old I am. But it's important because that's where Michael and I met, my co-founder. We met in the late 80s while we were in college together. We were at Harvard and we were rowers. We were on the crew team. And that was relevant for 2 reasons. One was just the friendship that developed. We've built 2 companies together now over the last 30 years. But also because being members of the crew team was pretty special, candidly. I mean, we just had this magical experience training in the Newell Boathouse, kind of this storied training facility on the Charles River. And my degree should say crew because that's where I spent all my time, was in that boathouse and with my teammates. And it just was this again magical time where you're training and competing and suffering together, and you're trash talking and supporting one another. And the only problem was that we graduated. And, poof, it disappeared. So that was 1990 when I graduated from college. And it was 5 years later that I had put together a business plan called Kana Sports. And Michael was my co-founder. He was a professor at Stanford at the time. So it wasn't Strava, but it was a version of Strava. We wanted to create this virtual locker room on this new thing called the internet. And we wanted to figure out some way to bring our buddies back together, all of our old, crew friends and runners and rowers and so forth, with this idea that by doing that, we could feel that thrill again. We could be motivated and, support one another as teammates. Great idea. Timing was a little off. And, very long story short, in 1995, 96, the internet's just getting off the ground. Turns out it's a lot harder to get people to post activities, and we couldn't quite figure out the business model. But the good news was that experience led us to a different startup that we launched, which went well. We had a great time, built a great company, and really became serial entrepreneurs. We fell in love with startups. So then you have to fast forward to 2008. Michael and I, we've left the previous company, Kana, in the early 2000s. He and I have both been on some boards, and he was still teaching, frankly. He was teaching entrepreneurship at Dartmouth. And we had the itch, we had the itch to start another company. And again, a very long story short, we actually explored a lot of different ideas, but one of the ideas we explored was dusting off the old business plan, the old Kana Sports plan, and just revisiting it. And candidly, what had happened in those 10 years was pretty fascinating. Number one, you just had much better access to data. You had Garmin devices and the beginnings of smartphones and so forth. So it was much easier for athletes to actually capture their activities, which was something that wasn't possible in the 90s. But you also had a different thing. You also had this, you had a social behavior online that didn't exist in the 90s. Because of the advent of Facebook and MySpace and Twitter and so forth, you now saw people very comfortable sharing their personal information in exchange for something greater. And that was not the case in the 90s. Like, we weren't sharing what I had for breakfast in the morning or, my birthday photos. But by 2008, that was the case. And so Strava was sort of a natural extension of that, the idea of, sharing your activities and being in a place where you could post and support one another. So that was the genesis of it. And that's, and the why behind it is probably most important. The why was really 2 things. One was, when we're active, we're better people. I saw that. I saw that when I was a student. When I was in the thick of racing season, my grades were at their best. Anytime as a parent, as long as I get my morning run in, I'm generally a better parent. I'm a better coworker. I'm a better partner. So we just have this fundamental belief that keeping people active is a good thing for them and for the rest of the world. And we also know how hard it is. And so, people keep people active. And the idea was if we could bring people together on a place like Strava, on a platform like Strava, that they would provide the teammates that people need over time.
That's awesome. And since you're a multiple times entrepreneur, then your approach of starting Strava would be very different. Like, what were the first steps that you've done once you came up with the idea?
Yeah, it's a great question. And truth, truth be told, you actually have to go back to the summer of 2006 when Michael and I decided we wanted to start something. We actually got together. We were living on opposite coasts. I was living on the West Coast here in the United States, and Michael was on the East Coast. And we got together in Colorado in the middle of summer. We sat down in a townhouse, and we actually went through a pretty rigorous process for about 3 days of exploring maybe not necessarily the business we wanted to start, but we did a bunch of exercises to kind of just get the brain flowing. So examples. We spent an afternoon writing down all the companies in the world we wished we'd founded. I wish I'd founded TERRA. I wish I'd founded Oakley sunglasses. I wish I'd founded Virgin Records. I wish I'd founded Starbucks. Whatever it was, we were kind of picking these names. But that was really powerful because it gave us a sense of, well, gosh, if those are the companies we wish we'd founded, why don't we try to go find an opportunity that's similar? And that really led us to consumer opportunities. We spent a lot of time digging in on the problems that annoyed us in our life. And so that led right back to sort of staying active. And, now we were in our early 40s and we were raising families and, we love to run and ride and race and have fun on the weekends, but life gets in the way. And so we saw that. We spent a lot of time thinking about the qualities of the company. What would it look like? Our first company, Kana, was this amazing journey. It was an enterprise software company. It grew very fast. We took it public in 99. It had a market cap of $10 billion at one point. I mean, it was a great story. But one of the ironies was it had never been profitable. It was always earning cash. We had raised a lot of money. We raised a lot of venture money. Then we raised money in the public markets. So it was this great growth story, but it was constantly burning. And so one of the things we wrote down when it came to Strava was, let's build a healthy business. Let's build something that can grow and be profitable and withstand the test of time. So that was actually an important part of the process you're asking about. Now, once we got to, okay, let's go do Strava, then there's a whole other journey. You're right. Then it was, then we had to kind of dig deep and start doing the basic startup things that they're pretty messy, but they work over time.
I think last time we were speaking, you described this in a way that you started speaking with you assumed that the first customer of Strava would be someone that would be the same age group as you, the same in fitness levels as you, and all that. So you took it from a personal perspective to start with a niche of a customer at the beginning that was very similar to you as a person. And then starting this way and building a community with these folks. Can we touch a bit there?
Yeah, you're right. The phrase I often use is inch wide, mile deep. We picked a very specific audience, very niche. You're right. They looked a lot like me in that the irony was we actually focused on a sport, and the sport was road cycling. Ironically, I'm not much of a cyclist on the road. I've had bad luck out there. I've been put in the hospital too many times. Michael's a good cyclist, but we picked it more because we could target that group. We knew where to find them. We knew how to talk to them. We knew they love data. Cyclists, by definition, are in love with their data, whether it's watts, speed, elevation, distance, time. All those things were important. So we knew we could do something with that information. And you're right. We took a risk because it looked niche. And what I often tell entrepreneurs is don't confuse a go-to-market strategy with a vision. Our vision for Strava was supporting a global community of athletes across lots of different activities, but we had to start somewhere. And so we picked that roadie. I think I've joked at times it was a mammal, MAMIL, middle-aged man in Lycra. And that's, you're right. We kind of found him, but in doing that, we could really understand what their experience was, what they were trying to do when they were out on their bike, what they were trying to accomplish, what was important to them when they're on their rides. And we began to build that into the Strava experience. Two examples. One was segments. Where did segments come from? Segments came because cyclists told us over and over that anytime they go for a ride, there was usually some climb in the middle of that ride that was the most important part of their ride. Didn't matter whether it was a 100-mile ride or a 5-mile ride. There was usually some little grade that this is where I'm going to push it. And so they wanted to know how they were doing on that. And we said, oh, we can identify that. We can show you that segment. And then the second thing we learned was people wanted to understand how their friends were doing on that same segment. And so from that, we began to develop leaderboards and different ways to compete on segments and compare performances. And just that little nuance and being able to build that into the experience, that's then what started to create community, because now your friend was really motivated to invite their other friend on so they could begin to compare one against one another.
Mm. And then it sounds like that you are using the customer feedback from the beginning as a process to build exactly what users wanted. Like, how were you communicating with these folks?
Yeah. So, I tend to channel Steve Jobs here because obviously he's better than any of us or was. And, he often says, it's not that we're building exactly what they want, but you have to listen to them. And then from there, can you create things that inspire them? So they were telling us they cared a lot about their climbs. And then we created this whole segment technology. They told us that they loved to sort of see how their friends were doing. And so we create leaderboards and ways to, competitions and challenges. But you're right. I think that, I will call this the Starbucks effect. And people have heard me talk about this before. I was sitting in a Starbucks one day with a very good friend of mine who's a consultant in the middle of subscription businesses and things. And she was asking about Strava. This was the earliest days. And at one point she said, well, tell me a bit about your target audience. And I said, I happened to look over, and in the corner of the Starbucks were 4 gentlemen sitting there who'd clearly just come back from a ride. They were wearing their tight Lycra outfits, and the bikes were outside, and they were on their, probably having their espresso. And I said, look over there. Those 4 gentlemen right over there, there's our target audience. And she said something really powerful because her eyes kind of widened, and she said, Mark, when I ask entrepreneurs, 9 times out of 10, they'll point to everybody in the Starbucks and say, the great news about our business is that anybody could be a target. What you just told me was there's those 4 people, and you can go have a conversation with them and you can start to really understand their needs. And I said, exactly. I said, we're not going to serve all the other 50 people who are sitting in here. Not yet. And so I think it's a really good question. What's happened for us is by having that intimate place with them and being able to have them. And we literally had conversations with people. Like, we'd bring them into the office. We would, as we started to get larger, you'd send out surveys and all the different things. And today Strava has, a great research team that does this just on a continual basis. But fundamentally, it's really no harder than take the time to get to know what someone likes and doesn't like and what their motivations are. And from there, we focused on utility. We focused on building something that if one person was using Strava, how could they get utility from it? What would want them to come back?
Mm. So you mentioned that you should be listening to users, but then it sounds like you are filtering sometimes their feedback. How should someone differentiate between that? Like, how should you know if this is a feature you should build versus if it's a feature you should leave out?
Yeah. Boy, I wish I had the answer to that one. And I think you and I would both make millions of dollars on this one. There is a real art to being able to navigate sort of how an experience should grow. I often joke that that's why I like being in the software business, even though I can't code at all. I graduated with a degree in art history. I can't touch software. I'm not an engineer. But I really like being in software because I think you can test and iterate so quickly. And if something doesn't work, you can roll it back. I was listening actually to an interview recently with Elon Musk, and he said something like, if we're not rolling back at least 20% of what we put out in front of our consumer, we're probably not taking enough risk. And I really like that. So I think my answer to you is I'm not sure, other than we do try to, it's important to test. It's important to try. I think where we have fallen short at Strava, I think anybody at Strava would own this. We used to have something that we called launch and leave, which was a problem. It was not an initiative. It was more sort of a phrase that pains us to this day, which was that we'd get a feature out there in its first iteration, and then we'd quickly move on to the next thing a little too quickly, because what we needed was time to sort of understand, okay, how are they using that? And now how can we improve on it? And how can we make it better and better? And I think that that's still a lesson. We're 13 years in. We're still trying to figure out how to do that. And when we're bad at it, we launch and leave something. Case in point, I'll tell you, in our team, I hope they would appreciate, but video on Strava, it's a really important addition to what we brought to the experience, because it just helps people tell the story. But it's also version 1.0. And if we're gonna do it right and really give people the tools that they need and so forth, there's going to be continued investment in it. Now, how do we gauge its priority against all the other things? That's what gets really hard. But constantly learning.
But back to the community aspect, Mark. I think I personally learned about Strava from a friend. I saw other friends speaking about Strava everywhere. I saw Strava in Cyprus when I was back in Cyprus, which is a very small island. You created something like, from the community, a very, very strong brand that people are speaking about it all around the world. Is this coming because of the focus that you had in listening to users, or is this something else? How was all this branding effect was generated?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just give you some quick facts, because I think it's important. You're right. If you think about our growth that we've had and sort of the growth of the community, it is 99% organic. And so it's not that we had some amazing branding exercise. We've invested in marketing. We've invested in our brand. We've always had very strong brand marketing at Strava. A lot of credit to folks who are still with our team today and have kind of helped just sort of make sure that we're authentic when we're out there. I can tell you stories in the early days. Part of what we would do, we showed up at a lot of events, small cycling events, small running events, and we were there to cheer people on during the race, and then afterwards help them upload to Strava and just introduce them to it. So a lot of it was, I often joke, in the early days, as an entrepreneur, don't be afraid to do things that don't scale. There's a lot of pressure from investors. What's going to be, it's like, actually, you have to do things that don't scale. And so a lot of our stuff that was not scalable was showing up where people are and what they're doing, and not being there to try to sell them something, but being there as their partner and trying to help them and, maybe relive their race that they just did. So I think that was it. And then I think that the fact that we were organic, giving our members this sort of tools so they could easily invite their friends. And there's value in having your friends on Strava. You and I both know I don't need thousands of followers on Strava to be interesting. If I have 2 or 3 close friends who kind of share my passion for the workouts that I'm doing, that's all you need. But it really elevates the Strava experience. Sure, you can use it as a private, just single player mode, but Strava is 1,000 times more fun when you're kudoing and commenting and you're kind of sharing and you're discovering sort of new routes and things with your friends. And so I think the experience itself is what lent itself to kind of becoming the community that it is today.
Back to the journey, like the first device that you connected, that you were tracking data with on Strava was which one?
It was Garmin's. It was Garmin cycling computers. Garmin, I think at the time it was like a Garmin 300 or something, and then maybe the 530. But it was just the handlebar unit. In fact, the only way you could use Strava, it was pretty funny. The only way you could use Strava, you'd go for a ride, use your Garmin, hit save on the Garmin, and then when you'd take it off your bike, bring it to your computer, plug it into the back of your computer, and upload the data to Strava. That was it. There was no Wi-Fi enabled. There was no sort of just auto downloads. It was literally plug and play. We were only a website. There was no mobile app when we launched. We launched in 2009, and We didn't have a mobile app till mid to late 2011. So yeah, those are the early days.
I mean, that's the reverse thing that you usually listen from investors, because it sounds like you are focusing on one very specific type of customer, and then one very specific type of customer had only one type of device. So it was such a small segment of the industry
Yeah.
that would probably turn every investor off. Like, how did you when did you start the conversations with investors to change this?
Yeah. So first off, some context, because it sounds crazy, but you have to realize that 2009, there weren't other alternatives. The reason we didn't have a mobile app was because mobile really didn't work effectively to capture the data well. Technically, maybe they had a GPS chipset in it, but it was horrible. The battery life was horrible. So you couldn't you couldn't provide quality insight and data and feedback without using a robust unit like a Garmin device. So Garmin was just sort of the best that was out there, and there wasn't alternatives. So it wasn't that we were kind of picking the one niche; it was kind of what was available to us. I think, to your point, though, when it came to sort of raising money and so forth, so Michael and I did self fund it for the first couple of years. We got to late 2010, and we started having conversations internally because we saw two things in the business. One was something you just alluded to, which is that we actually saw really good organic growth without any marketing, without any selling. Our members were rapidly telling their friends, and when I say rapid, I'm talking about, we had 5,000 cyclists on the platform, which for us was like, wow, this is incredible. But they were growing rapidly, and we already had the subscription business in place, and the conversion rate to subscription was very strong, very strong. And so we were looking at those 2 points of data and thought to ourselves, are we being penny wise, pound foolish here? Maybe if we actually had some more significant investment dollars and we started to actually build this out, and put some professionalism behind marketing and so forth, maybe we've really got something here. And so that was the conversation. So it became less around, hey, we're one little niche in this one thing, as much as with very little, we're already seeing traction. And from there, again, mobile was coming. We felt mobile could be a big jump for us, which it was. Once we launched in 2011, that changed the game. So the investor conversations became pretty interesting. And I'll be the first to acknowledge we were fortunate as well. We knew people from within venture. We'd been very successful in our prior company. A lot of people had made money there, so we were a known commodity. So we were able to have some good conversations with investors and raise the capital that we wanted in 2010.
So you started seeing all the growth from that niche market, and it was the moment that you were thinking we can expand into other type of athletes as well. If we put it this way, that would lead you to be able to have these conversations with investors. Like,
Yeah,
what's,
that's
what's
right. That's right. I think that I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's really worth repeating. Sometimes investors want to understand the vision. They need to understand what a big outcome could look like. And I think as entrepreneurs, we absolutely have to, that's what excites us as well. But as operators, we have to recognize that there's a path to get there. There's a roadmap that we have to follow. And so what's our starting point, or what's our go-to-market strategy, or where are we today and how are we going to get there? So for us, cycling was the perfect entry point. It was not crowded. There weren't other huge competitors. The consumer was, as I mentioned earlier, in love with the data. So there were a lot of nice things to start with cycling, with the vision being, if we get cycling right, can we launch in running? Can we do other sports? Can we think about geographic expansion? And then frankly, the other layer on this that we haven't discussed yet, but starting in 2011, mobile just unlocked access, because now you didn't have to have this Garmin device as the sole reason to participate on Strava. And so by unlocking access to a much larger audience and then expanding across sports and geographies, that was really between 2011 and 2016, 17, that was kind of this, and then we get into COVID with a whole other different growth path. But, that's where we saw the growth start to mature.
Mm, mm. So mobile was basically that enablement that allowed you to access a much bigger user base. You mentioned before like referrals that are very, very high, like 99%. If you know that referrals are very high and you're growing organically, like how can you enhance that? How can you tactically increase the user base based on referrals? Like, is there things you can do? Like, did you encourage users to refer more? Did you add layers inside of the product that would allow them to do that, or how did you approach it?
So one thing that I'll throw out there is, and this may seem counterintuitive, but one of the things we learned early in Strava that's, again, really important for entrepreneurs to think about, we focused less on growth and more on engagement. We spent much more time thinking about when a member found us, would they stay with us? It was, you can do a lot of growth initiatives that can drive rapid growth, but if you have high churn, man, that's a lot of wasted time. So we were much more of a mindset of let's have quality growth. Let's identify ways in which we can find members to join us, but let's focus on their engagement. And for us, that was two metrics. We called them sums, Strava uploading members. We needed them to be uploading. One of the unique things about Strava as a social network is that the vast majority of our members contribute, right? They're producers of content because they're putting their rides, their runs, their walks, their hikes, their ski sessions, they're putting those onto Strava. If I go to Instagram, I'm purely a consumer. I never post to Instagram, but I look at a lot of stuff, right? Or TikTok. Not true on Strava. So for us, engagement became key. And we looked at how many followers someone had in the first 7 days and how many activities they had. And it's kind of 2 plus 2. If you get 2 activities and 2 followers within that first 7 to 10 days, there was a really good chance that person was going to stay engaged on Strava. So, and in doing that, then you're right. Then there was a next step, which was we could begin thinking about how could we encourage them to invite their friends. I would say at times we've been good at that. At times we haven't. At times we've focused on it and times we haven't. There's still lots of things that I think we actually could do to just encourage our members to invite more of their friends. But I think going back to that first principle, engagement. Particularly when you have a product that by definition is more fun when your friends are on it. If people are engaged, they're going to tell their friends. They may not do it in the app, but they're going to do it while they're out running or riding or sitting at Starbucks and having a coffee, talking about the run.
I think I'm thinking back on myself right now when it comes to my usage of Strava. And indeed, like I'm generating content without me being on the platform. So for a couple of years at the beginning, I connected my device. My device was uploading data, and this brought me back to Strava after a while because I went back, I saw that I had a lot of activities there, and it made sense for me to stay inside of the platform. So I think it's engagement and also it's like re-engagement of users or like bringing back users in a way that it's because if I go back to my Instagram, I haven't posted for the last 3 years, so it doesn't make sense for me to go back. But on Strava, it keeps sending my data from my Garmin device or my whatever device I'm wearing at the time, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
a central location that always content is generated. And it's so valuable for my friends as well because even if I'm not there, they see that I'm training, they see that I'm cycling, they see that I'm doing all my activities. So the content generation part, I think, is like one of the biggest parts of Strava today.
Oh, without question. I mean, particularly as a subscription business where we're not investing in the content. We're not like Netflix where we have to pay producers and actors and people to put together movies, or we're not Spotify where we're paying musicians for music rights. No, we're really fortunate in that our athletes themselves are just simply sharing their active life. And not only is that interesting content, but then when you aggregate it, you can begin to do really, you can create the heat maps and you can think about new routes for people, and you can begin to really imagine new services that get created from just the sheer volume of activities that are coming in. Sometimes I've been like you. There have been times in my life when I'm uploading from might be a Garmin device or an Apple Watch or a Wahoo I mean, you name it. I've got it somewhere in my house, right? Every device on the planet. I'm sure you're the same. Even if I'm not looking at Strava that day, I know that Strava, the data is getting there. And that's what's so important to me is that, okay, there's a home for my data and I know it's being cared for. Then over time, I can go back and kind of put it all together in a way that makes sense.
Mm, mm. Okay, we spoke about product, we spoke about community. Let's speak a bit about the team. When you start building a great product, when you start building a great engagement with the customers, you are building what customers like. You have to be thinking of, how do I build a great team? How do I build a great culture? I think you built one of the best ones out there. So what do we not know? Where do we start about building great teams?
Oh wow, yeah. Well, I appreciate the compliment, and I do. I love the team that we've had in the past. We've got a lot of alumni, 13 years old at this point, and the team that we have today. And we're out there. We're constantly recruiting, and right now, frankly, we're even at the top of it. Michael, who's my co-founder, has been running the business, and we're talking about succession right now, and thinking about even the next generation CEO and so forth. So you're right; it constantly evolves. I think the culture came from, well, so I'll speak to the ABCs of Strava are something that have been talked about numerous times, and those are just simply the core values that we identified as a company about 3 or 4 years into our existence. It wasn't like Michael and I wrote them down the first day we started the company. We actually got a group together 3 or 4 years in and said, we should codify what we're experiencing here, a little bit what you're describing, kind of what the culture is.
How
And
many
from that,
people?
what's that?
How many people were you then?
We were probably 100, actually not even that, probably 50 to 100.
50 to
Um,
100.
and so, and growing and recruiting and just realizing, boy, how do we describe Strava to people? And, what makes this place unique to us? And so we went through a project together where there was a group of us who kind of did this and did the work. And out of that came our ABCs. And it's an ABCs because at the time, there was one A, there was a B, and two C's. And the A was authenticity. The B was balance, and the three C's were craftsmanship, camaraderie, and commitment. And those 5 words kind of define the way that we'd like to think we show up every day, whether that's to our members, whether it's to each other, whether it's to our shareholders. And I think I'll start with the very first one, authentic, like just being genuine. I mean, not only was it relative to be authentic, when you have a very niche audience you're going after, you can be authentic because you can build something that really speaks to them. But there's a different way of thinking about authentic, which is how am I authentic to my teammates inside the company, to my fellow employees? Can I be genuine? Can I be transparent? Michael and I have always been good about here's the good going on in the business, here's the bad that's going on in the business. And we need everybody's help to figure it out, right? So it's rarely been the case where somehow it's not that we're ever trying to hide something, but they're just transparency and being genuine, I think, go a long ways. Balance was another one. We had a phrase for years that probably at times hindered us, but it was a phrase that worked, and there's always time for ride or run. And our thesis was pretty simple, which was that that was a metaphor for life in general, but Strava should be a place where, look, if you've got an emergency that comes up or there's something important you need to deal with, do it. Take the time. And that includes going for a run. Some of my best thinking happens when I get out for 30 minutes and just clear my head. And so that was the balance piece. And I can go on, but you get the idea. We use the ABCs as a way of just sort of, again, codifying this is the kind of place that we want to be. And is it showing up? And we started really acknowledging it. We began creating, sort of an award system internally just to make sure we were acknowledging when people were really showing up with the right values. And it's something that got put right into any kind of onboarding. And so that when people joined, and I think over time, it just becomes part of your DNA. You have to live it though. You can't just write them down. It's really sort of how they show up every day that became
Mm.
important.
How did you build that award system that you mentioned?
Oh, we just did some simple things. One of probably the best one was there was something called the Strive Award. So Strava means to strive for in Swedish. And so we had the Strive Awards, and that was once a quarter. It was peer nominated. We have a small group, did not include Michael or myself or any of the executives, but there was a group that were sort of put together that would take peer nominations. So basically anybody in the company could nominate somebody else for a Strive Award. And that Strive Award was a way of saying, hey, this person showed up in a way that absolutely sort of represented the ABCs. And here's why. And they would give us, they would explain the situation. And then once a quarter, we'd just name 3 Strive Award winners, and I don't even, they'd get a token of our appreciation. I think we gave them some equity, some bonus equity, or maybe it was some cash or something. It wasn't really relevant what the reward was as much as the acknowledgement and I think the honor of just saying, hey, yeah, we can't ask any more of you than to show up that way. So that was an example. And some of them worked, some of them didn't. I know we had kudos coins for a while. I'm not sure if those still exist, where you could kind of reward a friend in the company if they were doing something. But the Strive Awards work well. They still exist today. They're a big part of our culture.
Awesome. When it comes to like hiring, when you set these cultural values down and you started thinking about hiring, how could you see these things in new hires? Like, did you need to, were you able to see them through your hiring process, or did you really saw these traits when they joined the company?
Yeah. Another great question. I'd like to say, oh, we're really, really good at identifying them during the interview process. I'd like to say that, and I would guess that if we're really, really good at that, we're probably good at it half the time. Because you're right, it's nuanced, and I think people put on they're gonna put on their best selves when they're interviewing and so forth. That being said, I think over time you can. I was talking to someone this morning and I was joking with them around kind of that fear we always have of trusting our instincts. But I know, forgive my age, I'm almost 55 years old. Like I now know, trust my instincts, like in my instincts. And so it's not like I have a series of questions that gets me to authenticity. But I think you know when someone's probably overselling what they've done in the past. I don't need them to oversell. I just need them to be honest. Just tell me what worked and what didn't, right? Or somebody who I often joke nowadays that when I go hire, I want 3 things. I want somebody who's humble, somebody who's hungry, and somebody who's smart. And if you can find those 3 things, I think that they actually meet really well into our ABCs. So it's just kind of a way of saying it's not rocket science, but I think the more that I know my own interview style is to not come in hot and sort of make someone pressured, but rather to get someone to come out of their shell and tell me about themselves. And as you do that, you can start to see things. Have they been on teams before? How well have those teams done? What did it feel like to be on a team? Were they involved in the sports at a young age? That tells me a lot about something. Not that you have to. We don't have a bunch of athletes who work at Strava, but those are all little signals that when you pull them together, I think you can start to see, oh yeah, this person will fit.
Mm, mm. And like, what's a process like? How many interviews would you need to understand that? Is it through one interview or is it through a series of interviews?
Yeah, and again, I got to admit, I don't know what it's like at Strava today because as chairman, I don't get involved in the hiring the way I did. I can tell you when I was CEO, we probably spent too much time putting people through the ringers. There were 2 sides to it. I tried to ensure that anybody going through an interview process at Strava was having a good experience. And that was important. They should feel like they should be treated like royalty. 1, because we really do appreciate the time they're spending to interview with us. And 2, if we end up not hiring them, I would still love for them to say kind things about Strava. So I would caution any entrepreneur, hey, if you're interviewing somebody, it's a privilege and treat it as such and treat that person with a lot of respect. And because you never know what they're going to go out there and say somewhere else. And then the second thing that we did at Strava was we put people through a lot of interviews. Like part of the way I think we'd get to that question you're asking around the ABCs and good fit was to get them to have met sort of enough people across the org that you could calibrate as a team. And I would argue at times that probably didn't serve us well in terms of expediency and just getting going, but it's what developed inside the company and it worked for us. So when I say that, it wasn't like, 15 interviews. It was more like there were probably 3 or 4 people on that hiring committee who would be focused in, and we'd want that person to spend time with those 3 or 4. And then we as a group would come together and say, we feel good? Great. Then let's make the hire.
Awesome. Mark, data wearables. Let's speak a bit about that. You started with Garmin in the early days. Then mobile helped a lot to aggregate more information with the GPS that they have. And over time, they added these cameras that they are measuring your heart rate and blood oxygenation and all that. What wearables did you add afterwards? And what data points were important over time?
Yeah. Well, for a little context here, so my easier answer is almost easier to answer which devices didn't we have, because we were very focused on ensuring that if there was a device out there that an athlete was using to track their performance, we wanted to make sure we could work with it. And that was part of a strategy we saw how important the Garmin relationship was and others. And we made a couple of commitments. Commitment number one was we would be as agnostic and as ubiquitous as we possibly could. Wherever there was a device that someone was using, we never wanted to say no. We wanted to say, we'll figure out how to bring that in. And the second commitment we made was we're not going to be in the hardware business. We're not going to launch our own wearable. We're not going into competition with the wearables. I often joke that there's a reason they call it hardware. It's really hard to do. We don't want to be in that business. And so those two things together, I think, did allow us a unique place in the market where over the course of, again, it took us years, but we were in a place where I think today, I've lost track. It's hundreds, if not, it's hundreds at this point of devices that integrate. From a data perspective, that's interesting because I think we're just now beginning, and you're probably closer to this even than I am, but it's amazing to see where we're headed in terms of what can be collected. In the first 5 to 10 years of Strava's history, I can tell you the most important stuff was actually the basics. We were trying to get, from a performance standpoint, you're trying to get speed, distance, elevation. You're trying to get GPS coordinates that you actually have a sense of where people moved. And those are kind of your big four, right? And then from that, you were probably extrapolating things like power, or you were pulling, the first biometric thing that was so important was heart rate and being able to bring that in. And so we evolved as the devices themselves have evolved. And I think now, today, you fast forward, we have a team that is really excited about what we're seeing. Everything from, the CGM units that literally get plugged into somebody's arm, to the hydration units, to things that happen when you're not being active, to sleep, and so forth. Things that are critical to an active person's life, but maybe don't happen during the activity. They happen important times outside of the activity mode. And so we continue to explore that. We continue to think about, what's relevant there to the Strava experience and how do we integrate it in.
When you're at the stage of Strava today, how do you approach data in this way? Like, is it a very broad way of let's launch this suite of products? Or are you again launching something very small, testing with a few users and seeing if it works before you deploy it?
Yeah. I in general, and it's a good question. Probably at times we've done both, but I would say it's very rare now that when we roll something out, it hasn't been vetted with a subset of our users. We're fortunate today. I think publicly we've talked about, there's well over 100 million people who've registered with Strava, and that gives us just lots of people to be able to talk to and integrate with. So whether it's us communicating with them, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, and having conversations with them and understanding what they're needing, or it's a feature that we now have in a beta. And so we're going to have a holdout, we'll have a small group we'll test with. And then as we get out, even as we go out into a larger rollout, we'll still have a holdout group that doesn't have access to it, so we can understand some behaviors, once it's out at scale. So there's just some things that have come with the maturation of the business, and the fact that we've got a large enough team that's sophisticated in how they think about it. But and then we make mistakes. Then there's times when we've rolled things back, and then we've faced backlash from the from our community, and we've had to work really hard to get it fixed and get it back out. And we've tried it all. Strava is good at making mistakes, learning, and then making new mistakes. And I think that's good. I think that's part of what makes a healthy company.
Mm. From all these data points that are coming out today, like you have the blood glucose levels, you have the blood pressure levels, you have all these sleep metrics. Which ones excite you most? Like what interests you personally most, and which ones do you see Strava using in the long
Yeah.
run?
Yeah, there's probably two answers to that. There's a personal interest, and then there's the way Strava does it. And the one thing that the caveat I think to throw out there with Strava, we've been very cognizant from day one that Strava's at its best when it is fun, it's entertaining. We never set out to be the preeminent, intense data analytics platform. There's other great platforms out there today that I admire, that I've used in my own sort of athletic life, that can give me really rich, detailed analysis in areas that Strava will never touch. In part because that's not our DNA. Our DNA was largely, how do we keep people motivated and inspired to be active? And if it's connecting them to those other services, that's great. But so I tell you that because when I think about some of these things that are coming out, the glucose monitoring being the perfect example, that is kind of PhD level stuff to even understand. I've been a beta user right now. I appreciate where they're trying to go, but it's complicated. It's nuanced. And so, am I interested in it personally? Yeah. In the same way, I'm interested in some of the new stuff that's coming out around hydration. Yeah, I find that interesting. I know I'm chronically dehydrated, so if I had something that's constantly behind me, but that's different from, therefore, we're going to put that into Strava tomorrow. Because I think for Strava, we're always mindful of, at this point, sometimes less is better. And just because you have every possible piece of data that's coming in, if it just gets confusing and muddled and you're kind of losing sort of your North Star in terms of what you're trying to offer your customer, then I think you're doing a disservice. And that's where I think we play an important role, because I think we can partner. We don't have to become the CGM platform of choice. Frankly, the companies themselves that are doing the CGM monitoring, that's what they're doing. They're building that. If we can introduce the Strava athletes to CGM in a basic, fun way, so that they can then go leverage these, that's a win, right? That's a win for the athlete. It's a win for Strava. It's a win for the partner. That's the way we think about a lot of these today.
Mark, every time we speak, I usually write down the things I learned, but like there is such an extreme clarity that you have when it comes to the model of Strava, which is, I wrote down, like it's like a circle. You have content generation, hence you do maximum amount of wearables and maximum amount of sources to do data, and then you have more engagement. And then the second part is that you choose what not to do, which is not some things that people speak about. Like most people speak, we're going to do everything, we're going to be everything. But like in the case of Strava, I always hear this extreme clarity, this exceptional story, and this choice of via negativa, what I like to call, which is removing things instead of adding things. That is like, it's incredibly insightful and helpful for entrepreneurs, I think. Now,
Well,
having
I'm glad you're hearing it. It's one of those classic things, is do as I say, not as I do, because I'm not sure we always execute it as well as we'd like. But uh, I think you and I, because you and I've had enough conversation to know, we have similar philosophies, and people that we've admired in the past who've done this and done greater things. And that's, I do think that's the big unlock, is when you can have, there's a certain confidence that has to come from that, because saying no to things is, yep, it's risky. But no, people who know me well know I have a funny phrase, which is, look, I'd rather be decisive and wrong than to waste too much time overanalyzing and not getting to what we need to do. And why? Because if I'm wrong, I'll course correct. I'll do it. But so I think that that's, philosophically, that's what drives a lot of how I live, and hopefully it shows up in Strava and little bits and pieces. But It's an art. It's not a science.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
yeah,
Mark, let's speak a bit like last couple of questions. I saw that Michael is leaving now as a CEO from the company. What what are the what should we expect from Strava for the next few years? What's the vision for the company from now onwards?
yeah. Well, okay. So let me clarify a few things before I start throwing out what's coming. You're right. Michael is. He's announced that he'll be stepping down. He hasn't resigned. He's there. He's running the company, thankfully. But we've been putting a lot of thought over the last few months into sort of what succession looks like, and we just believe that Strava's got a long history in front of it, and we'd like to bring some talent to the team that, in some ways, has seen the next playbook. If that makes sense. Has sort of seen this movie before that's coming in front of us, because we continue to think we've got a lot of growth and opportunity. So that's what we're doing. So we're kind of making an investment in some of the leadership investment right now. And in terms of where things are coming, I'll just say the following. There's two things we're really excited about at 50,000 feet. One is just the ways in which we can support our athletes, our members, in a way that allows them to organize together, to do things together. Like the community aspect of Strava is so important. People talk about our community, but what they forget is the reason that we consider ourselves a community is because our members constantly interact with each other. I always have to differentiate. Somebody asked me the other day, they were asking me, how we build community. And I said, are you sure that's what you want to build? And I always use Apple as the example, obviously a company that I admire greatly, use all their products. I don't consider myself a member of their community. I consider myself a very loyal customer, but I don't need to. I'm not interacting on the Apple platform. I'm not there. Not in the same way that on Strava, like I'm a part of something bigger. And so we're very focused on the investments we need to make to help our members interact in a way that keeps them inspired, that keeps them active. And so that might be things around the way that groups organize and teams can do things together. It might be just better ways of communicating with each other, better ways of telling your story. It's kind of funny. I'll be the first to fully admit, as a social network for some people, or kind of a vertical network, we're not very social in our features. Or at least if they are, they're circa 2014, right? They're not 2022, 2023 type standards. So we're very committed to continuing to make it easier and easier for friends on Strava to enjoy each other's company and to support each other in their active life. That's one. The second thing that gets me excited is, if we're going to be a healthy community, I have this, I'm going to apologize for a second. I got a really bad metaphor, but I think you'll understand my point. If you and I were going out to start a town in the middle of the Nevada desert next year, and you and I went out there, we took our bikes and our running shoes and we start having fun running around the desert, it'd be about 2 days in before I'd turn to you and say, did you bring the water and the food? And where are we gonna go find a place to sleep that's not just a tent on the hard ground here? And if we really wanted to build a community out there, we would actually convince people, like, hey, we need a grocery store, and we need the fire department, and probably gonna need a hospital at some point. We're gonna need the infrastructure that allows the community to thrive. Well, in the same way, I love to think of Strava. The metaphor there is that if we were a community here, what are all the other companies and services and partners, the ecosystem that enable this community to thrive? And how can we help build the tools that connect those companies to Strava? This is why I'm excited about what TERRA is doing. I think that together, because you're right there, like the glue to help this happen, but what are the things that our partners need? Not so that they can advertise to our members. That's not what's interesting. It's more like, what do our partners need so that they can offer their services effectively to Strava members, and vice versa? Our members can really start to learn, whether it's a training plan, whether it's a new pair of shoes, whether it's a new monitor or a new device. How do we bring those together? That's, I think, an interesting unlock that we've got tens of thousands of API partners today. I don't think we've really yet invested in the tools to help those API partners be successful. And I know this is the business you and I are in. I think together that's the kind of thing that gets us super excited going forward.
Incredible. Mark, that was super insightful. Thanks so much for the chat.
Anytime. Yeah, happy to do it.